I used to believe that silence meant weakness, that if you didn't raise your voice, you were losing. But I learned the truth the hard way. Silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means control. From the outside, my life looked ordinary. I was a devoted wife, a quiet woman, the kind people described as patient and understanding. My husband used to say he loved that about me. He said I never questioned him, never argued, never made things complicated. What he didn't know was that I noticed everything. It didn't start with proof. It never does. It started with absence. He was home, but not present. His smile felt rehearsed. His touch felt polite, as if he was doing what was expected. At night, he would turn away before sleeping. In the mornings, he rushed out without looking back. And when I asked simple questions, his answers became careful. Too careful. I didn't confront him. I didn't accuse him. I didn't want explanations I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I watched. I noticed how his phone never left his hand anymore. How messages were deleted before I entered the room. How he started protecting his privacy in a house we once shared without locks. And still, I said nothing. People think silence means ignorance. They are wrong. Silence means observation. I began to understand something about my husband. He wasn't careless. He was confident. Confident that I would never question him. Confident that my patience was blindness. Confident that my love had made me weak. That confidence became his mistake. I didn't search his phone. I didn't follow him. I didn't beg for attention. I focused on myself. I listened to how he spoke when he thought I wasn't listening. I watched how his mood changed when certain names appeared on his screen. I felt the shift in our home, cold, subtle, undeniable. And one evening, without warning, clarity arrived. Not proof, not evidence. Clarity. I realized I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. I was afraid of reacting too soon. So I waited. Waiting is an art people underestimate. It requires discipline. It requires strength. While he grew careless, I grew calm. While he assumed control, I regained mine. I started keeping notes, not out of obsession, but awareness. Dates, times, patterns. I noticed how often work meetings happened late at night, how business trips became frequent, how excuses sounded rehearsed. Still, no confrontation. Because I wasn't preparing a fight, I was preparing freedom. The day everything changed did not arrive with drama. It arrived quietly. A message appeared on the table beside his phone. The screen lit up for just a second, long enough. I didn't read it fully. I didn't need to. The tone told me everything. That night, I looked at my husband sleeping beside me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel pain. I felt distance. The kind of distance that comes when love has already left and only habit remains. That was the moment I understood something important. I wasn't losing my husband. I had already lost him. What I was about to gain was myself. I didn't confront him the next day or the next week. I let him believe his secret was safe. I let him believe my silence was weakness, because silence had become my strategy. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be messy, it would be undeniable, and by then, I would already be gone. I didn't rush into anything after that night. Rushing is for people who are afraid of losing control, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I woke up the next morning the same way I always did. I made breakfast. I asked him if he slept well. I smiled. He smiled back, relieved. Relieved that I was still the same woman, the quiet one, the forgiving one, the predictable one. What he didn't realize was that predictability had ended. That day, I began to detach, slowly, deliberately, not emotionally, practically. I stopped sharing my thoughts with him, stopped asking about his day, stopped waiting for his attention. Instead, I started paying attention to myself. I noticed how much energy I had wasted trying to keep a marriage alive by myself. How often I had adjusted my needs to protect his comfort. How silence had once been my sacrifice and was now becoming my strength. He noticed the change. Of course he did. He asked if something was wrong. I said no. He asked if I was tired. I said maybe. He asked if I still loved him. I smiled and said, I'm just thinking these days. Thinking scared him more than anger ever could. Because anger can be manipulated. Silence cannot. Days passed, then weeks. His behavior grew careless. People become careless when they believe they are safe. Phone calls were taken in another room. Messages deleted too quickly. Excuses repeated too often. And still, I said nothing. Because I wasn't waiting for proof anymore. I was waiting for certainty. One evening, he left his phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. He went to shower. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen, not shaking, not panicking, calm. I didn't scroll. I didn't invade. A single notification appeared, a name I already recognized. That was enough. I placed the phone exactly where it had been and walked away. That night, lying beside him, I realized something painful, but liberating. He wasn't smarter than me. He was just counting on my kindness. And kindness, when mistaken for weakness, becomes dangerous. From that moment on, I stopped protecting his image. In my mind, in my heart, I began documenting quietly. Dates, patterns, changes, not obsessively, purposefully. I wasn't building a case against him. I was building an exit for myself. I opened a separate email account, changed passwords, gathered important documents, marriage papers, financial statements, things women are never taught to prepare until it's too late. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning independence. And the strangest part, I felt lighter, while he laughed louder, texted faster, lived more freely. He thought he had escaped responsibility. What he had really escaped was my emotional attachment. One night, he kissed my forehead before sleeping and said, You're very quiet these days. I looked at him and replied, I've learned that silence helps me hear the truth. He didn't understand. He smiled and turned away. And that's when I knew he would never see it coming, because the end of a marriage doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with clarity. And I had never been clearer. The moment of truth doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with precision. By then, I had already stopped hoping for honesty. Hope is fragile. I needed certainty. And certainty came quietly. It came in the form of routine. Every affair believes it is special, different, unpredictable. But betrayal always follows patterns. I noticed how Thursdays became important to him. How he suddenly cared about his appearance on ordinary evenings. How his excuses grew confident, almost rehearsed. Confidence is dangerous when it's undeserved. One Thursday morning, he told me he had a late meeting, nothing unusual. I nodded, smiled, wished him a good day. After he left, I sat alone in the house and felt something new. Not anger, not sadness. Focus. I didn't follow him. I didn't spy. I prepared. I checked everything I had already gathered. Messages. Patterns. I backed them up. Twice, because when a woman decides to stop being a victim, she learns to protect herself first. That afternoon, he came home unusually cheerful. He kissed me longer than usual, complimented my cooking. Guilt often disguises itself as affection. That night, he fell asleep quickly, peacefully. I stayed awake, listening to his breathing, not with love, with awareness. I realized something then that broke a part of me and healed another. This man did not fear losing me. He feared losing comfort. And I had mistaken the two for far too long. The next day, I made a decision. Not to expose him yet. Not to confront. But to step into the final phase. I stopped pretending. I didn't argue. Didn't accuse. Didn't cry. I simply withdrew. Emotionally. Mentally. When he spoke, I listened politely. When he touched me, I didn't lean in. When he joked, I smiled faintly. Distance unsettles liars more than confrontation ever will. He asked me one evening, "Are you unhappy?" I looked at him carefully and said, "I'm awake." That word stayed with him. I could see it. Because people who lie depend on others staying asleep. Days later, something unexpected happened. He made a mistake, a careless one. He forwarded a message to the wrong email address, mine. It wasn't explicit. It didn't need to be. It was intimate, familiar, comfortable. Too comfortable for something innocent. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop, because now I had everything. Not just proof, permission. Permission to choose myself without guilt. That night, not to leave yet, but to remind myself that I could. I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. She wasn't broken. She wasn't angry. She was resolved. I whispered to my reflection, "You stayed long enough." And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully because the truth was no longer a burden. It was a key. The truth didn't need an announcement. It didn't need witnesses. It didn't need anger. It only needed timing. I waited 3 days after receiving that message, not because I was unsure, but because I was calm. Calm is terrifying to people who depend on chaos. On the 4th morning, I woke up early and made breakfast like always. Coffee, toast, silence. He sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, comfortable in the belief that his world was still intact. I watched him the way one watches something that no longer belongs to them. When he looked up, I smiled and said, "We need to talk tonight." His hand paused. "Just for a second." "About what?" he asked casually. "About us," I replied. Nothing more. That was enough. All day, he was restless. Messages were typed. Calls were taken outside. The confidence I had once mistaken for strength began to crack. That evening, when he came home, I was already dressed. Not dramatically, not provocatively. Just myself. We sat in the living room. No raised voices. No accusations. I placed my phone on the table between us. "I know," I said. 2 words. That was all it took. He laughed nervously. "Know what?" I unlocked the phone and slid it toward him. He didn't touch it, because liars recognize the truth immediately. "You went through my things," he asked, trying to shift the ground beneath his feet. I shook my head. "You left them unguarded." Silence filled the room. "Not the kind that exposes." "I didn't mean for it to happen," he finally said. "She understands me. We didn't plan it." I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I spoke calmly. "You didn't betray me because you were confused," I said. "You betrayed me because you believed I would stay." That sentence landed harder than any scream ever could. "I'm not here to punish you," I continued. "I'm here to free myself." He reached for my hand. I moved it away gently. "This conversation is not about forgiveness," I said. "It's about clarity." I stood up and handed him an envelope. Inside were copies of everything: messages, dates, evidence, and this, I added, is not revenge. It's closure. I walked toward the door. He asked, "Where will you go?" I turned back once and said, "Somewhere I don't have to question my worth," and I left. Not with tears, not with regret, but with dignity. Weeks later, I heard pieces of his world had begun to fall apart. People asked questions. Explanations were demanded. I didn't involve myself. I had already chosen peace. Today, my life is quieter, smaller, perhaps, but honest. I wake up without fear, without suspicion, without silence that hurts. Silence is still part of me, but now it is chosen, and that is the difference.